Okay. So thanks for joining us. Today we have Carlos, which is standing over there. Carlos, wave to everyone. Hi. He's going to talk to us about OKR, Objective and Key Result. But before his introduction, I want to go through some of the slides that we have. First of all, thank you guys for coming and keeping this group going on. We are 1,500 people plus. Join us on LinkedIn. We started to share some of the news, some of the updates on LinkedIn. We started to put our recording on YouTube, so if you missed anything, if you want to revisit some of the things, you can watch it on YouTube. And there's always the Slack channels that we brag about. And a big thank you to the McKinsey investment that they are hosting us and they're providing generously with the lunch and the space. So give it up for yourself and for the McKinsey investment. This is to join other communities as well. There are not only our community that you can benefit from. There are plenty of them out there. This is based on alphabetical order that they put it out there. If you want to get a list, I have a description of them, bit.ly/TO community. If you want, check it out. Probably you know most of them. Before starting Carlos' talk, I want to tell a story. Are you guys okay? Yeah? Okay, so story time. So this is the picture that you guys see on the left. This is the first picture ever of the Lean Agile Network. At that time, it was called Agile Launch. It was captured December 2016. Yes, December 9, 2016. And from that moment, we continued gathered together for lunch and learn and grow together. The picture on the left. So the first one was on the right that I was talking about. The one on the left is when we started. It was November 2016, and it started in one of the idea came about in one of the other meetups. That it was me and one of the other people that you can see, Diane, in this picture over here. We were talking and saying, why do we need to spend time after hours to get together and do something? We are all typically in the core downtown area. Why don't we do something after lunchtime? And that meetup was a special one, a system thinking TO meetup. That we were supposed to see Chris Chapman, the founder of that meetup, to here, but he's not here. But one of the big helpers, Schumann, is here. So Schumann, wave to everyone.
Hi.
So the system thinking TO, they have announced that they are discontinuing the meetup. The October 24, 27 will be the last one of them. I just want to, us as a community, thank them for being part of this bigger community. I was hoping that we saw Chris and thank him in person, but this is a gratitude for him that he started this meetup as a system thinking TO, and he leveled up or leveled up. What's next for us would be for our October session. We are going to have it in November 1st. We are going to have Tino Mark. He's going to talk about measuring outcomes or how to get meaningful metrics. So if you're interested, we are going to announce it in 1 week or 2 weeks, and then we are going to talk about that. Without further ado, today's talk again, Carlos. I know Carlos for a long time. He was a big community supporter. He's a thought leader in what he does. And what he does is amazing. He helps product people and the business to deliver outcomes that are most valuable to their customers. I don't think that I do justice introducing himself, but I'm going to leave it to him to start the presentation and share what he has for us. Give a big round of applause for Carlos.
I appreciate the kind words. It's very nice. How's everyone doing? See some familiar faces in the room, which is nice. thanks a lot for taking your lunch and coming to join us and myself listening for this talk. Really appreciate it. So I'm happy to be here today and share or impart some of my knowledge and experience, and also engage with you. So listen to your knowledge and experience as well and answer some of your questions. So this topic is on objectives and key results. How many people have heard of objectives and key results, OKRs? They seem to be getting quite popular in the last few years. So I think more than maybe 90% of the people in this crowd have heard about OKRs. So really quickly, thank you to Shaheen for the introduction and for the opportunity to come and speak to everyone from the community. I really appreciate that. If I just do a quick overview on myself. So I worked with Shaheen actually quite a bit, doing a lot of Agile coaching in the past, both at Scotia Digital Factory as well as the TELUS digital teams as well. So I've been doing Agile coaching and Lean Startup coaching actually. So specifically, I guess my background is more towards innovation, towards Lean, towards product design. But I've always found myself kind of within the Agile community tribe. So happy to be here. The last few years I've been working with AdaptiveX, and what we're doing is actually introducing kind of a repeatable process for innovation inside of organizations. So testing business ideas, testing product ideas. Doing a lot of training as well, so workshops on design thinking, on innovation, lean startup. And then we also run design sprints. So if the organization is looking at kind of de-risking a particular investment or a large project, we'll run design sprints to help with that. Anybody interested in that stuff can come and talk to me afterwards. But otherwise, let's dive in. So a couple things. One, we're going to look at defining what an objective and key result is. So what is an OKR? How do we identify them? How do we track them? What are some of the principles behind them? So when we talk about goal setting, for example, what does that actually mean? And then also, how do we incorporate them inside of the organization? So what does a typical deployment look like or an implementation? Finally, hopefully there might be a couple things that you can actually take away from this meeting or from this workshop today so that you can actually try or at least look at a little bit differently back inside of your organization. So there is going to be an activity towards the end of this particular talk. So I'll have a couple of just quick agreements. Obviously time boxing is going to be important so that we can manage to get you out of here on time. I'll use the hands up protocol, so just get everybody's attention back into the room. So if you see me raise my hand, then finish your sentence, raise your hand too. If you see anyone's arm go up or hand go up, then finish your sentence and raise their hand, and that'll bring us back to attention pretty quickly. Obviously, you're going to make this experience what it means to you. So I'm going to recommend the no device rule. I see everybody's mostly got their eyes up here. So for those of you that actually, how many people attended Agile TO this month? Quite a few. So we've got repeat customers. This is good. This is a good sign. That's one of my metrics. No, just kidding. In terms of questions, so there's going to be some dialogue throughout the presentation, but I'll be reserving questions obviously for the end. So I'm going to try and get through the material as much as possible so that we can get to an activity and also have a discussion. Okay, so for those of you at Agile TO, you would have seen a couple of the slides, but there's going to be some new ones, so it's a different talk. This is the S&P 500, and it's showing the life expectancy of organizations that were listed on the index back in the 1960s. If you were listed on the S&P 500, you would have enjoyed a life expectancy of over 60 years. These days, you're lucky if you have more than 15 years being listed. So what do you think is happening? Disruption. And what does that look like? How is that manifesting itself?
New business models.
New business models. So what's driving that maybe? Technology changes?
Customer preferences.
Yeah.
Cost of entry.
Cost of entry, you said that.
Lower cost of entry.
Lower cost of entry, customer preferences,
Competition.
other companies. Yeah, so there's lots of preferences, lots of opportunities. Actually, one of the individuals, I think at the last Agile TO meetup, had mentioned VUCA, right? So volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So I updated my slide deck, and I included that in the PowerPoint presentation. I figured, okay, that's a really good one. So business is becoming unpredictable. Things are changing, and we need to be more responsive to that change, essentially. And so how do we do that? If customers' preferences are changing, one thing that we know is that we only achieve value as a business once we're actually able to solve our customers' needs, whether that's through a problem, a job that needs to be done, or a particular pain point, for example. But the only minute that we actually achieve the value that we're looking for is when we're able to satisfy that need. And so that's what we do, most of us here in this room. We work with our teams to really try and understand, okay, how do we find that sweet spot where we're maximizing the value for the business while at the same time delivering on the job to be done for the customer, right? So we're trying to do both. And finding that sweet spot, that's where the opportunity is. So how do we do that? Well, we work with teams and we launch projects or ideas or initiatives, for example, or we develop products. And so what we're doing is we're actually taking these ideas to market to actually see if they're addressing the needs of our customers. But we know how the only way to really understand whether it is meeting the mark or not, or if we're finding that sweet spot, is if there's data to support the fact, or evidence to support the fact that we're actually delivering on that particular need. But we know that the cycle that we go through is more like this, where we have an idea, we start building that idea, we launch it into market, then we collect the data to see if there's evidence to support whether we're meeting the needs or not. The reality is sometimes it looks more like this, where the build cycle actually starts to increase and we're taking longer to get the data that we actually need to provide the evidence or the support. So in some cases, it takes a very long time, right? It keeps going and going and going. And the longer it goes, you've got a couple things that are happening. One, you're increasing the chances or the likelihood that you're actually working on the wrong stuff. Two, sometimes team members actually lose focus, lose momentum. They kind of are wondering, like, what are we doing here? In worst case scenario, you have a situation that kind of plays out like this. Right? So you have the situation where you build something that nobody wants. And you're trying to figure out, okay, like why? We just spent 12 months, 18 months, we've been working on this thing for so long, what happened? And that question, why are we even doing what we're doing? Like, what's the purpose? Why am I getting up? Why am I going to work? Why am I meeting, with these people? Why am I collaborating? Like, why am I here, essentially? Here's an interesting statistic. So less than 40% of employees in organizations actually know what their company's goals are, what their company's priorities are. In fact, if you do a spot check, if you just walk up to an employee and say, hey, do you know what the top 3 priorities are for the organization right now? Less than 40% of people would be able to actually tell you. So it's kind of like you're on a cruise ship, right? It's like, hey, do you know where we're going, Kyle? It's like, no, I have no clue, but isn't this fun? Like, we're not quite sure where we're going. Whether or not we care is a whole other discussion. But what's interesting is, if you kind of dig a bit deeper, they say, well, 7%, so classic statistics here, right? Because we're not exactly sure what's going on, kind of under the hood. Of the 40%, let's say 77% of those employees fully understand their company's goals and what's expected of them. Right? So let's say you do kind of know what the priorities are. In terms of understanding or being aligned to those priorities, or knowing how you yourself can contribute to them, that's a whole other lower statistic. So what we know, it's not enough to just say, okay, this is kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to identify that sweet spot, and we're trying to hit the sweet spot. We also need to bring our employees along with us. Okay, so it can't just be about maximizing business value, maximizing customer value. There's employee value there. How do we actually engage our employees? How do we align with them to understand, this is the mission that we're on. Everybody's on board. We're clear about that. So we're looking for that sweet spot. Here's a quote by Steve Jobs, who was kind of trying to say the same thing. So his famous quote about hiring smart people. So the point is, people are self-managing. You don't need to manage people. Once they understand what they're trying to actually get accomplished, they'll figure out essentially what they need to do in order to get that done. Right? So what they need essentially is a common vision. And when we're talking about vision, we're talking essentially about goals. What are we actually trying to achieve here? And so his definition of leadership was being able to articulate what the common vision is and getting people to essentially align around that common vision. And that was what Andy Grove was trying to do at Intel when he kind of introduced this concept of objectives and key results. So this is, I believe, in the 80s and 90s. And so he was influenced heavily by management by objectives, which was pioneered by Peter Drucker. But he wanted something that was a little bit more. He wanted something that was bidirectional, right? So he wanted something that was engaging from the employees, not just top-down. He also wanted something that he could disconnect from compensation. So he didn't want performance tied directly to compensation. He wanted to be able to divorce that. He also wanted something that was shorter in cycles. So instead of doing this kind of annual planning, annual performance review, he wanted something that he could do quarterly, for example, or even bi-monthly. And so that's what he introduced was objectives and key results. So objectives and key results, essentially when you boil it down, is kind of like a lightweight goal-setting framework to help you essentially align and engage around measurable goals within your organization. So initially pioneered at Intel, there was a fellow by the name of John Doerr, and I believe actually Shaheen's got some books of his that are in the back there, Measure What Matters. And John eventually actually took what was happening at Intel and he took it to Google. Now he took it to Google when they only had 400 employees. And actually, essentially they've scaled from 400 employees to 40,000 employees, and they've been using OKRs along the way ever since. Obviously, a lot of Silicon Valley companies use OKRs to help them in terms of, again, aligning around measurable business goals. But you have a lot of non-tech companies or traditional, I guess, tech Silicon Valley companies like Walmart, Dun & Bradstreet, ING, for example. So a lot of these organizations are using that same framework. So what are some of the benefits? Why would people actually adopt this framework? Well, there's a couple. So one, it's adaptive, right? You have the destination in mind, but there might be different optimal routes in order to achieve that destination. So you're continuously looking at that at a cadence. Most organizations use a quarterly cadence, so every 3 months. It's outcome-oriented, which means it's not enough to just think about the tasks or the initiatives or the projects or the code or the documents that you're working on. You need to kind of look at it in terms of what results does working on that stuff actually produce? And how do we know that those results are then pointed in the direction that we're actually trying to move in? It's also engaging. So part of it was, how do we get people to remember? How do we get people to remember so that everybody knows exactly where we want to go? Well, one way to do that is by including them in the process, essentially, right? So co-creating the strategy and execution. And we do that by having these kind of bi-directional goals, essentially, right? So they're more likely to get buy-in, they're more likely to remember what the priorities are if they're actually included in the process. Transparent. So, a big difference between, I guess, traditional way of management in terms of managing by objectives was kind of like behind closed doors, in private, essentially kind of establishing, what the strategy is or, what the goals are, for example. This is, everybody's aware of them. It's visible. It's at the beginning of every single presentation that we actually do, every time we do our sprint reviews, for example. So it's quite transparent. A lot of teams will hang up their OKRs in their rooms. And it's continuous. This is a key piece. So it's not enough to wait till the end of the quarter, or sorry, to the start of the next quarter, to basically say, okay, here's how we performed. You're checking on a regular basis, right? So weekly check-ins. And you're using your existing meetings. So maybe the reviews, for example, that you're using to actually just see, okay, are we still headed in the direction? And are we still producing the results that we're looking for in order to achieve our quarterly OKR? The formula is pretty simple, or at least in theory, it's pretty simple. So it's got two parts to it. The first is the objective, which is what are you actually trying to accomplish? And then the second part is the results. Like, how do you know when you've accomplished it, right? Or how do you know when you're actually making progress? So the objective is qualitative. You're just using a description. You're just simply saying, what are you actually trying to achieve? And you don't need to use any numbers. You don't have to include any numbers. You're just, if you're a startup, you would say something like, we're trying to achieve rocket growth. Okay, so maybe it's fit to their culture, for example. So what is it that you're actually trying to achieve or focused on this quarter? And then the second part is quantitative. So the key results have to have numbers in them now. Okay, so if we're saying, okay, we're trying to achieve an awesome customer experience this quarter, how do we know? How are we actually going to measure? Well, maybe we'll actually talk to customers. Maybe we'll do kind of see how likely are they to recommend this experience or this product or service. And if that's hitting the numbers or increasing by a certain percentage point, then we know that we're actually making progress or we're being successful. Maybe it's the fact that they're coming back and actually repurchasing or re-experiencing our service. So we're looking for certain outcomes, customer behaviors, for example, that will indicate that we're actually making progress towards our goal. Sometimes you might need to balance your key results, right? So if you think that things are going to get pretty bad, or people are, not intentionally, but maybe start gaming the system, essentially, you might have some balancing metrics to help kind of support the system, right? So yes, we want to make customers happy. Yes, we want to provide them with an amazing experience, but not at the expense of spending $100 million, for example, for every event. So maybe we have to add in the fact that we want to still keep our cost of acquisition maintained or even improved. Here's an example, launching a new product. Well, what does that mean? Traditionally, maybe launching a new product might have been, okay, did we launch it on time? Did we launch it on budget? Did we launch it on scope, for example? Maybe 2 of those 3 variables. But that's not enough, right? Facebook has now kind of changed the game from that perspective. They're looking at very specific, what's the one metric that matters? Well, for Facebook, it was daily active users. Or when we launch in a new campus, how long before we can actually have 90% of the potential customers from that campus actually using our product. For them, it was 90% of all users would start using the application within 2 weeks. So now when they're prioritizing all of their features, it has to move the needle on either that metric or another metric that they actually kind of looked at in terms of an outcome was how much time are people spending once they're actually using our application. So the average time was 75 minutes. So if we're actually going to be, again, prioritizing any features, is there a way to prioritize features that will improve that metric? Either that metric, 75 minutes average time spent, or how much can we actually get 90% of the population within a specific campus on-ramped into using our application. So you're looking specifically for results. Now, there are 2 types of key results. So you have activity-based key results. And these would be a little bit more traditional. So they're kind of like output-oriented, right? So again, did we deliver this feature? Did we deliver it on time, for example? Did we deliver it to quality? That would be an activity-based key result. Or you have a value-based key result. And that's kind of what we were talking about earlier. So this is actually showing that there's some value to the organization. So things like customer behaviors, they're spending more time on our application. That would be a value-based key result. So this is, when we starting to talk a little bit more about outcomes, moving from outputs to outcomes, it's kind of moving from those activity-based results towards those value-based results. So I'm going to start with an example. Here's Southwest Airlines. I don't even know if I can actually put them on my presentation, but I'll remove them. They're my favorite company, by the way, so we are recording this. So one thing that's important with OKRs is that they still have to be linked to strategy, right? Because it's about strategy execution. It's about aligning the whole organization with executing on your strategy, essentially. So OKRs would be a miss if you're missing that kind of strategic component. So a good strategy is going to have a couple of key pieces. The first is, why do you exist? What's your purpose in life or as an organization? Typically your purpose, sometimes they call it your mission, but it's anchored towards your customer or your client, right? You typically exist because you're trying to help somebody or help people. These days you see it on LinkedIn all the time. I help leaders future-proof their business, for example. So their value proposition or their purpose exists inside of their tagline. For Southwest Airlines, their purpose is to help people connect to what's most important in their lives, right? Whether it's work or personal. Now, obviously, they're an airline company, so connecting makes a lot of sense. But the job to be done there is to basically connect people to what's most important in their life. Now, they say that's their long-term purpose, right? So it doesn't matter if their mechanism changes. Maybe it's self-driving cars, maybe it's airplanes, maybe it's trains, doesn't really matter. Now, in terms of vision, these are their goals. So they say, look, if we're successful at our purpose, then we'll be successful at achieving our goals of being the most loved, most profitable, and most flown airline in the world. What do you guys notice about those statements?
They're short.
They're short?
Yeah.
They're super short.
Yeah. Vicious, lofty.
They're ambitious, they're stretchy, right? Lofty, like the most. Wow, that sounds like you want to beat out everybody basically. You want to be number one, right?
Still more or less measurable.
Yeah, you can kind of measure them. Like how many flights did we do? What are our clients, telling us on our NPS scores? Well, how much costs did we have last quarter, right? Are we profitable? So they're quantitative, you can measure them. So those are examples. OKRs are meant to be ambitious. They're meant to be stretchy. It's not, okay, we do 40,000 units every month, so next month we'll do 40,000 because we know we can hit it. That's not necessarily the purpose of an OKR. OKRs are strategic. Google used them quite a bit for what's called moonshots, which is, hey, we know that this is really out of our comfort zone, but we're going to give it a shot anyway. And that's what they would use OKRs for. Okay, so you kind of have the purpose and you have the vision, but you still need your strategy. Like, how do you know where you're going to play? And how do you know how you're going to win? Those are two kind of key core questions when you're actually defining a good strategy. Sometimes you can use, very simply, if you just got a team, you want to sit down, you can use a business model canvas just to kind of highlight, within 20 minutes, articulate what your strategy is. You can see for Southwest Airlines, a key piece of where they're going to play is they're going to decide, okay, we're going to focus on budget air travelers. So we're not going to focus on all travelers, we're going to focus on people that are value conscious, that are budget air travelers. And the way that, go ahead.
I think it's like a top-down. Like who actually decided all these, the vision setting, the goal setting?
So in this case, it's going to probably in a very large organization be set by different levels within your organization. Chances are both the strategy and the purpose, your value proposition, as well as your vision is being set by your CEO.
Sounds to me like a top-down approach.
In terms of the strategy, chances are it's going to be, at the highest level, for sure. Now, OKRs is different, right? So OKRs connects to your strategy, but your strategy is going to be set by the highest levels, for sure. And your vision is definitely. Now, part of it is, okay, where are we going to play? How are we going to win? So if we're going to play with budget air travelers, how are we going to win? Well, we're going to give them low fare flights. And we're going to give them a premium service. So we're going to make them feel like it's business class. But the reason we're going to keep our costs so low is because we're actually going to have a single modeled aircraft. Right? So our airport costs are going to be low. We're going to be able to transfer all those costs back to our customers. So give them amazing quality service at a very low cost. Okay, so now we got to connect it. So this is kind of where OKR starts to play a role. Right, so we have our vision, where we want to be in 5 to 10 years. We have our annual goal, which is strategically where do we want to achieve in a year from now. But we have to link that to our objectives and our key results. So the first part is there's kind of two components to it. There's what the company is indicating. Okay, here's kind of our quarterly objectives. This is what we would like to achieve. And then teams around the organization are saying, okay, that's where we're going. This is what we think we need to do in order to get there. Okay, so you kind of have two components. You've got company objectives, team objectives. Then there's the outputs, like what are we actually working on, the initiatives, the projects, the code, in order to achieve those objectives and key results. So if we look at a specific example, let's say we're using Southwest, right? So at the highest level, it's to be the most flown airline in the world. That was one of their key goals. And this year, we think we can actually achieve the most daily departures in North America. Right? So we're not going to focus globally at the moment. We're going to focus here in North America, and we think we can actually have the most departures of any airline. So that's what we're going to try and achieve this year. Now, from a quarterly perspective, we're saying, look, we're going to focus on the US only. So yes, we could go all over North America, but right now we're going to focus on the US. And we know that we can be successful because we'll be able to capture at least the top, let's say half of the top 50 metro areas within the United States, and we'll be able to increase flights booked by 30%. So that's our goal for this quarter. So teams are like, okay, what can we do to contribute to that? You know, how can we actually achieve that goal? What are some options? What are some things that we can do? Now, my favorite outcomes are obviously customer outcomes. So I spend a lot of time with product. I spend a lot of time with design, for example. So focusing on customer behaviors are key. So I love customer outcomes from that perspective. So a good way to kind of look at that sometimes is by actually drawing out your journey. So we've got a customer, the job to be done is that they want to connect to what's important in their life. We're servicing that as an organization. You know, how do they learn about our products and services? So maybe they go through Facebook advertisements or Google advertisements, maybe through Snap Travel, Travago. Maybe they come to a marketing page or a landing page where they learn more about maybe some particular offers. Maybe we've got a rewards team that's actually providing special offers that they can actually redeem for travel, for example. And then eventually they make it to an area where they can actually reserve some tickets for a flight. Right? So they start actually booking their trips. And so we kind of map out what that customer journey looks like. And there's different teams potentially working on different aspects of that customer journey. Maybe you've got a digital team that's just onboarding new customers, so all the registrations, for example. So maybe they're at the front half of this particular journey. And they notice, hey, there's an awareness to registration conversion rate here that if we improve, will actually improve the number of flights that are being booked. It'll have a direct correlation to that. So they'll say, look, there's a 2% improvement in registration conversion will actually increase 10% flights booked. So we think that we can contribute to flights booked based on improving the registration flow. And we're going to improve this registration flow. Maybe we'll improve the usability. Maybe we'll improve reduce the number of outages, for example, or offline pages, whatever the case may be. There might be other ways that they can measure it, but they'll focus on that. So with that company objective, they'll actually set their objective, which then says, okay, so we're actually going to achieve an awesome online customer experience, and we're going to measure this by the increase in number of registrations going through our flow, and also reduce the number of calls to the call center. Right? So that will be an indication that this will actually work, and we're going to measure that this quarter. So that's an example. That's an example of, okay, what's our long-term, kind of like 5 to 10 years, we want to be the most flown in the world, right? This year, we want to concentrate in North America. This quarter, we think we can make a really big push in the US. And here's kind of how we're going to measure it. And teams will say, okay, this is how we're going to measure it. This is what we can do to actually get us there. And of course, you have your output or your initiative. What is it that you're actually going to be working on in order to make that happen? An AI chatbot. Or maybe we're upgrading our chatbot, for example. So what's the actual initiative in this instance? All right, so this is where you guys are going to get a chance to try it out. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I want you to take a piece of paper that's in front of you. So everybody should have a document, and there's 3 questions on that document. So take a pen, take a piece of paper, and just spend 3 minutes and try and fill out that document for now. I'll let you know when the time is up. But basically, you're just going to write down something that you're working on. So maybe you're working on an initiative. Maybe there's a larger product that you're working on. But try and describe what exactly is it that you're doing. And then essentially then figure out, okay, if you're successful in doing that thing, what does that give your company more or less of, essentially? So just try and answer those couple of questions, and then I'll let you know when the time's up. We have just over a minute left. We have 30 seconds. Fifteen seconds. Okay, time is up. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is I'm going to ask you to find a pair, or if you're at a table and there's, let's say, 3 people, then 3 of you can have that conversation. I'll give you 3 or 4 minutes to have a discussion. There's a couple things that I want you to think about. One, just explain, okay, this is kind of what I came up with, if you're okay with sharing that. And then try and think about these questions, like why is this the most important outcome for your organization right now? And how is this connected to the bigger vision of the company, essentially, or strategy? So find a pair and share what you have, and then maybe a quick explanation on those 2 questions.
Let's be careful with this.
Okay, so mine was to establish a center for enablement for DevOps for product teams to utilize. So what I wanted to do was decrease the scope of iterations by 50%, increase delivery by 100%, right? And so qualitative statements improve flow.
So sorry, let me see.
So mine is increased strategy.
Yeah, so we're trying to create a DevOps practice. And they can't take this one.
Oh, okay. So in what way are you doing that?
Yeah, so digital teams. So we're trying to improve the quality of the products that they're building.
Right now we're seeing
So deliver more shorter amounts of features.
I think that
What kind of products are you
Yeah, so right now we're focused on digital to build a bigger client team with other providers. So building courses, online experiences, and then eventually. So they're building on top of the Salesforce product. So it's just a matter of getting a lot more features out to
Are you finding that you have a certain number of that are using the online system more than others?
Absolutely, yeah. So younger demographic, a lot define older demographic will want to
I had recently though that we were trying to see frequencies, like
If you frame it like that, no, I think it doesn't have to. I think evening is that very
I don't have the numbers right now, but this is surprisingly a lot of students are not stuff that I don't to what extent they're interested in actually
yeah, it'd be interesting to know what types of things they would be comfortable with.
I think it's a little bit to frame it.
Yeah.
Changing it will be driven to
That's interesting.
and then suppose reduce dependency just to random. How do you define what's
Hopefully you guys had a chance to switch. Apologies if you didn't. But again, I want to get you back to work on time. So how was that? For those that were able to try it out and then also explain it, how did you do?
I like the last part that was about the qualitative statement. It helped me to make it more clear what these goals are about.
Okay, good. And trying to achieve, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. So you did well.
Yeah, I like that it was really explicit. So there's some things that might go over my head that I didn't really write down, something like that. And I think the second part is it kind of made me think about how I was going to get there.
Right.
So like there's a target, but like what are the interim steps?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe some more kind of like leading indicators, right? Yeah. Okay. Anyone else?
It strikes me as something that once you set an objective, you take one look at that and say, yeah, there's objectives inside of that one.
Right.
But you can pull the same thinking out of the box and repeat yourself.
Yeah.
So it's down to something really actionable.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so, yeah.
Figuring out what percentage are, like what it is measure, how much it should be.
Yeah, it's hard, especially if you don't have a benchmark or a baseline. So if you don't know how many people are going through your registration flow today, and you're saying, oh, well, I think we can increase it by X percent, so kind of like a guess, right? Sometimes teams have to actually, the first quarter will actually get the benchmark, like go and get the data, and then be better prepared to start improving, let's say, next quarter, for example. So what about your organization? Do you find that you measure outcomes or outputs more? What are you measuring more? Outcomes or outputs? Outputs. I heard outputs. How many people show of hands? How many people would say their organization measures outputs more than outcomes? So more than 50%. Anyone want to share, like in terms of maybe some people who measure more outcomes, like their experience or their examples? Outcome at the product level? Okay, so not necessarily across the whole organization, but you have it at the product level? Yeah, okay, like what would be some examples?
So we tried a different approach. This is not what this agenda for today. So this impact mapping.
Okay, yeah.
So that was more in alignment with what we are trying to do, what should we do,
Right, yeah,
and what value are we going to get
right.
doing it. So it was very tech modernization kind of product
Okay.
for our process.
So impact mapping is a great tool to be able to look at outcomes. For example, looking at behaviors, how do we want to influence those behaviors, what are some things that we can work on. So very similar, for sure. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so in closing, just before we have some questions. So one, OKRs kind of invite people to provide input and take ownership and engagement over the goal setting process. So A great question I think earlier, just in terms of let's say if our purpose or our vision is being set by the CEO, which by the way, sometimes you might have like a Horizon 3 team, and what I mean by that is an experimental team that's testing out new business models or new ideas, and they might actually come up with the value proposition, right? Eventually, maybe the CEO might be like, okay, yes, this is a good one, let's double down on it. So it's not necessarily that the CEO is always going to come up with a bright, purpose or value proposition. It can come from other parts of the organization. But then when it comes down time to figuring out, okay, well, what are our goals? Like, what should we be focused on? OKRs have an opportunity for employees to say, look, I know that we want to expand in the US, but right now our customer service is terrible. And so if we're trying to be the most lovable company, here's some challenges that we believe need to be focused and addressed this year. And that will bubble up through the process to the CEO. And then when they're setting quarterly objectives, they actually might say, yeah, we've had to put this on hold. We've had to put, expanding in the US on hold because right now we have to focus on lovable customers, like making sure that our customers love our brand, for example. So it gives them an opportunity to do that, helps align people to understand what is the most important thing that we should be focused on right now. It's a mindset change, so it's really trying to change the mind in terms of outcomes are more important than the outputs. So yes, we can do this with an AI chatbot, or we can also just do it with a really great agent on the phone, essentially. Key results are the quantitative kind of measure that defines success, and quantitative, so objectives, and the key results. Whatever they are, they have to be linked to your strategy and your vision. I thought I had one more slide, but apparently I don't. I don't know what happened there. It must be after this one. But either way, let's open it up for questions. Fernando.
So have you seen the key results are expressed from a customer impact perspective, not from a company or business impact?
Yeah,
I'm just wondering how many people here wrote in the second part an impact seen from the side of the customer, because you could write things like increase revenue or increase customer consulting opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. So
that's for me, not necessarily for my customer.
Right. So fair point. You might have actually written it as a customer outcome, not necessarily a business outcome. I put, to make it a little bit easier for people, I put business outcome. I think even in the template it said business gain or pain, but you may have done a customer outcome. So how many people, so the question was, how many people measure outcomes in terms of the customer's job that they're trying to get done, essentially, or value to the customer? Did anybody actually write that down inside of their sheet?
Well, I kind of did both, because I said something that was along the time, like I said, what I'm offering is something that the customer will commit to at a low level and continue with me on a journey. So that's actually both.
Right. Okay.
Right, because the customer is getting value, and then the business is getting value.
Right.
Right? So I think you can do both.
Yeah. Well, I would argue you would need both. Something that's good for you, but also good for the
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's what I meant. They're getting enough satisfaction that they stay with me.
Technically, the reason we do what we do is to help them with this.
Right.
Right.
We like this. We like the flights getting booked because that's our bottom line, right? But they don't care about that so much. They care about this. Now, if we do a good job helping them get what they care about done, we'll get more of this. So this is kind of our business value and the customer value, essentially, right? So you're right. We can't lose sight of what it is that we're actually doing for the customer. And the better we get at that, the better we will on our business value that we're looking for.
Yeah, I have a question / comment. I think in our organization, we may actually have outcome-based metrics at the very top. We can have 4 clear outcome-based metrics. But from there, what happens is you get general projects assigned for the year.
Right.
And then it just becomes project outputs.
Right.
And not back to what outcomes from the organization level are we driving towards.
Right.
That's why.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, so sometimes what we say is, look, we just care about sales, we want revenue, we want to make our customers happy, but we don't do the work to understand, well, what are the other outcomes? I think somebody said here, like, you can kind of break it down, right, and identify what are some of the leading outcomes of, hey, if we improve this experience, there's a direct core impact on that. So let's focus on this outcome right now because we can work on that. So it's kind of like taking that elephant and then carving it down essentially. With outputs being really the last thing, almost like options. Yeah.
So I have a question about who writes the OKR. You mentioned that we put some key results in OKR in order to prevent people from gaming the system. For example, like for example, keeping the cost under 5%.
Right.
Do the employees initially start writing OKRs, and is there a review process for auditing the OKR?
Yeah, great question. So teams will write the OKRs. First, they'll bubble up some of the feedback. Executives, leaders will take that feedback and then say, okay, here's kind of what we're thinking in terms of objectives for the quarter. And now teams will then go and actually look at, okay, what did we originally think? What do we need to adjust? And then how do we actually refine our objectives to connect?
But who guarantees that in the end what the team defines as okay? Because this is a practical problem that we have.
Yeah.
Who guarantees that what the team defines will lead to what there's always a gap there that everything gets convoluted.
Right.
Is there how do you in practice make sure that do you do another round of checking of OKRs for individual activities?
I mean, typically there's still some leadership, right, or management within connected to the team somehow. That's there as part of that process. And then you can also do a lot of work to align. Like some companies will have like an alignment week, an entire week, for example, where it's kind of like a big room. It's like getting a big room like this. If we have 400 people here, everybody will get in a room for at different times throughout the week and just kind of map out dependencies, make sure that everybody understands kind of who needs help, who needs to work on what, and build that alignment essentially. Here's kind of what we're going after. Maybe we need this team to help us out, for example. Fernando.
Actually, it was the same question. So how do you ensure the alignment, right? So it trickles down, then it needs to trickle up, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and so the key part is the alignment, and that's the hard work that you have to do essentially. Right. Thanks for contributing that.
So whatever the target setting or goal setting is there at whatever interval, it usually comes within operational efficiency in the organization.
Within an operation?
Operation efficiency.
Okay.
Organization needs to operate in that optimum model to be able to reach those results, whatever is being set, like a 30% reduction in cost or 20% enhancement in customer experience.
Right.
So this is something that the organization can even commit to in such short intervals. And the second thing is this the two actually do kind of capital planning investment horizon, like so where I'm going to put my money in this bucket. So I actually be able to support all the pillars. Like one of the organization I was has like 50,000 employees and they have 4 pillars.
Right.
They have to find the right balance. They are actually strategizing all these capital investments around those 5 pillars and not to put all the money against 1 or 2. So finding the right balance exactly where the money is going. That is the capital piece.
Right.
And then the other piece is the operation piece. So I'm struggling to actually connect these dots. Like this model is supposed to run my capital investment, or is it supposed to bring operational efficiency in the organization? What is it?
So it's definitely operational in the sense of how do we, let's say, align, run, in terms of going after the goals that we've set. So a lot of the work that I've done has been in product. So similar to kind of what you were mentioning before around impact mapping. And so what you'll have in situations like, we have to spend 2 to 3% of our revenue on some new product sources or new value propositions. So we'll say, okay, well, we're not going to do a 12-month project. So what we'll do is the first quarter, we'll just run a number of experiments. Right? So we'll actually see if people are interested in this value proposition. And that would be an OKR, so validated learnings, experiments run, for example. And if it looks good, maybe we'll actually put out an early workable product within the next quarter. Right? Q3, maybe we'll start growing that product. Q4, we'll actually put out a 1.0 version of it, for example. But you're kind of taking that big goal and figuring, okay, how do I actually chunk it down to get that work done? The work that we need to do in order to achieve that end result. And you can have different measurements throughout the quarter based on that different work, essentially. Now, teams will still operate. Like, okay, we tried these value propositions, it's not working, essentially, so we're going to pivot, we're going to adjust to something else. And we'll continue to fund those teams as long as we're getting some validated learnings out of it, essentially. So the funding model is connected, but it's separate, if that makes sense.
We are at time. So thank you, Carlos, for your very Carlos will be sorry?
We're over time.
Yeah, we're over time. Yeah. You will be here if you guys have some more questions. Carlos will be here for quite some time. What else? Oh, if you want to learn more about OKR, I brought some books over there. There are 4 of them over there. Take a look if you want. Grab one. And yeah, thanks for coming. The next one would be in November. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.